Hello and welcome to Algebra 1 and 2 Completing X-Factor Puzzles. This video is for everyone who is just now starting to learn factoring or is having a hard time with figuring out what numbers to put in those parentheses and filling out that X-Factor puzzle. So let's go ahead and get started. The quadratic equation in standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. When you are starting out with your X-factor puzzle, you're going to do A times C as your top number, and then B is going to be your bottom number. So remember, B is going to go into the bottom. And then you're trying to find two numbers that multiply to A times C and add to B. And a lot of people struggle with just this, and then their teacher ends up moving forward, and then they're struggling because they don't know how to get those numbers faster or how to do the signs. So let's go ahead and do some practice. So we know that the numbers that we need are going to multiply to 28. So what I can do is I can start listing my factors of 28. So my first pair would be 1 and 28. If I add 1 and 28 together, I get 29. If I subtract them, I can get 27. So 1 and 28 can make a 29 or a 27. We're looking for a pair that can give us an 11. So now I've got 2 times 14, and 14 and 2 can give me 16 or 12. So I'm getting closer. And then if you're struggling with finding factors and you're only able to use a scientific calculator, especially if you're in Florida and taking your Algebra 1 EOC, what you can do is try out the different numbers. So 28 divided by 3, that gives me a decimal, so I know 3 isn't a factor. So if you struggle with basic facts, or if you are struggling with those divisibility rules, go ahead and lean on your calculator for this. And then we've got 28 divided by 4, and I would just keep going as I start to get closer and closer together. So I have 4 and 7. Now 4 and 7 can give me an 11, so that's what I'm going to put here. And then I'm going to think, okay, positive 4 plus 7 gives me 11, and then a positive 4 times 7 gives me a positive 28, and so this works out. All right, now let's start with the bottom. So the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start listing my factors of 48. And so I know 1 and 48 definitely is not going to give me a 13. Then I'm going to try 2 and 24. Nope. And then 3. And if you need to, lean on your calculator. 48 divided by 3 gives me 16. And I know 3 and 16 can give me 13. So 3 and 16 can either give me 19 or 13. And so I'm going to go ahead and write these two. And then I want you to think about, how would I get a negative 13 out of 3 and 16? 3 minus 16 is negative 13. Then I want to go back and check the top. 3 times negative 16 gives me negative 48. And that works out. Let's go ahead and try some more. So we have 42 here and a 1. We're going to ignore the negatives while we're looking for these factors. So I have 1 and 42. And then I've got 2 and 21. And then if you're struggling, lean in on your calculator. We've got 3 and 14. And then notice that all of my numbers are getting closer and closer together. If I have a 1 in the bottom, that means I should be looking for numbers that are going to be right next to each other. If I try out 5, I know 5 doesn't go into 42. And then I've got 6 and 7, and now there's nothing else that would go in the middle. Once I get to 7, it starts going backwards. And so 6 and 7 can give me a 1. And then to get -1, it's going to be 6 minus 7. And then positive 6 times -7 gives me a -42, and that works out. So now thinking about the one that we just did, what two numbers that are right next to each other would give us a 15? So I've got 1 and 15, and then I've got 3 and 5, but these are the only factors that I have. And so looking at this, there are no numbers that can give me a 1. And so this would probably end up being a prime or not factorable. So when we get into factoring, you're going to see where this comes in, but this would not be factorable. There are no numbers that would be 1 away from each other that would give us a 15 and a 1. And so this probably would end up being prime, or where we would only be able to pull out a GCF, and that would be it. So GCF factoring, or it would be prime altogether. All right. Thinking about this one, and we have a 0 at the bottom, that means it needs to be the same number. So for these, that means we're going to be looking for a square root. And so with this one, remember, we're ignoring the negatives, so don't try to take the square root of -625. It's not going to work. So we've got 625, then I'm going to hit my square root button here, and I get 25. So 25 and 25, and then 25 minus 25 gives me a 0. Notice that this top piece is negative. This is super important when it comes to differences of squares and looking at patterns when it comes to factoring. If you have a perfect square in the top with a 0, that perfect square has to be negative in order for you to use the difference of squares. So we've got 25 minus 25 here. And now let's go ahead and go on to the next one. We've got 1 and 44, 2 and 22. And I know 2 and 22 can give me a 20. And so I've got 2 and 22. And then to reach a -20, that means I have a +2 minus 22 to give me that -20. For 72, I have a 1 at the bottom. That means I'm looking for numbers that are right next to each other. And if you know your basic facts, you know that that's going to be 8 and 9. So it makes it a little bit easier and faster when you can kind of see some of these patterns, like looking at 1s and 0s, but you're going to need to know your basic facts, or you're going to need to know how to use your calculator for these, okay? And then for this one, to get a +1, I have to do 9 minus 8, and that gives me a +1. Then you always need to go back and check. -8 times +9 gives me a -72. And now let's take a look at this last one. So we're looking for numbers that are going to be 4 apart that give us a 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8 give me 5, but then I've got 4 and 6. And so looking at these, I don't have a pair that can give me a 4. And you cannot mix and match. 3 is always going to be with 8. You cannot mix and match and do something like 8 with a 4, giving us 4, because that's not a pair. 8 times 4 wouldn't give us the 24 that we're looking for, so you can't mix and match your pairs. And so for this one would also be prime, not factorable. Now let's go ahead and try some more. These are going to be the last ones. We've got -36 and 0. I know 6 times 6 gives me 36, and then 6 minus 6 gives me 0. If this was a positive 36 at the top, it wouldn't work. All right, now let's go ahead and do 70 and 9. So I have 1 and 70, 2 and 35. And remember, if you're struggling with those divisibility rules or with your basic facts, use that calculator. So I'm going to put in 70 divided by 3. And remember, if it comes out to a decimal, it doesn't work. And then I'm going to try 4. 70 divided by 4. Okay, gives me 17.5. So that's not going to be a factor I want to use. 70 divided by 5 gives me 14. And we know 5 and 14 can give me a 9. So 5 and 14. 14 minus 5 gives me positive 9. And then negative 5 and positive 14 multiplied gives me negative 70. And then we've got 7 and 2. The only factors of 7 are 1 and 7, and that won't give me a 2. So this one would be prime, not factorable. Okay. All right, and then let's try 34 and 19. So 34 and we've got 1 and 34. We've got 2 and 17. 2 and 17 can give me 19. 2 plus 17 gives me 19. 2 times 17 gives me 34, so I'm good to go. Negative 16, I know is going to be 4 and negative 4, just based on what I did before. And then we've got 1 and 24 can give me that 25, and so I can just stop at that first factor and I'm good to go. Hopefully this video helped you out with using your X factor, and it kind of gives you that leg up before you get into factoring.